I'd like to do that. So please give your permission if you're happy for me to record and you're happy to be here under those circumstances. So a very, very good morning to all of you. We've got more than 2/3 of the people I was expecting now, so I'm inclined to get going. Thank you, Sam. So it down as Sue, but you're actually Sam. Thank you, Sam. That is great. And if there are any of you who, when you signed up for any reason, didn't give your organization or email, please do let me have that if you're happy with that in the chat so that I can make sure you get the recording afterwards as well. And then you can either listen again to key points or share it with colleagues. Right, I'm going to screen share now and we shall get going. So thank you so much for joining this morning. It's lovely to see you all and a very happy new year to all of you. As you will be aware, just before Christmas time, the new Working Together to Safeguard Children guidance was issued by the government. It came out on the 15th of December, when many of us probably had other things on our minds. And I know for some of you, those clients we've got with us, some of you were dealing with safeguarding issues at that time as well. So reading this document was probably not at the very top of your to-do list. We've got 168 pages in this document. And so whilst we are all as education providers expected to read it and digest it, we also appreciate that you have many other things to be doing. So this is a précis of the key updates. And I'll highlight as we go through some of the things that I think are probably particularly important, thinking from an education perspective in particular. So the only thing I'm struggling with here is moving it on. Good. Okay. The aims of the session. So it doesn't hurt sometimes to go back and remind ourselves of what the basis of the guidance is. And this document is, as it says on the tin, very much about working together. But not only do we need to be able to understand what's expected of us, but it's really handy to have a key idea of what is expected of others in that mix as well, those other key strategic partners. So I'm going to highlight some of those things as we go through and also reference a couple of sections of the document to help you, so that where there are times where you're thinking, well, should such and such an agency be doing this? What should they be doing? What are the timelines? We know where to go to get access to that kind of information, so that actually it's much more empowering for you in your roles, knowing what to expect and what to ask for, really. So we'll consider the implications for us in education as we move through this particular session. I don't expect it to last for longer than an hour. Sometimes I get caught out, and in which case I'll carry on recording. And if you need to leave, please do. I know that you will have other commitments throughout today, but I will make sure that you get the recording. But I've tried to include all of the most salient points for us in education at the very beginning and in the middle section too. And then there are other bits for information only. So those are the aims for this particular session. Working Together to Safeguard Children is issued by the Department for Education. And I think that's probably quite important, actually, in terms of thinking about, okay, so where is this coming from and why? And it very much, as the document recognises the critical and unique role that education has, whether you're from a school, a college, a private education provider, in working together with other agencies to safeguard children. And by children, we are, of course, thinking about all of those young people up to the age of 18, but older for those who are care leavers and care experienced, and those who've got special educational needs up to the age of 25. This is our statutory guidance. So by statute, by law, this is the guidance that we need to be following to make sure that we help protect and promote the welfare of children. And as the guidance says here, nothing is more important than children's welfare. And I know that, you lot live and breathe that really every single day. So what does it cover? It tells us what we as individuals working in education and other sectors need to be working towards in working with others. It applies to organisations and agencies, and we'll remind ourselves of which organisations and agencies it does apply to. because some of them you'll work with very, very regularly and some you won't. And I have to say, there was one in the list that I hadn't realised would necessarily be relevant. And what this guidance does, actually, this time round in the update, is seeks to encourage the local strategic partners to be thinking much more holistically about who they can include in working together to safeguard children, including the voluntary sector and others. So that's really important. Now, the absolute basis of this framework is having 3 local safeguarding partners. And that is the local authority, fundamentally, whether it's a unitary authority, if you're in a city, or whether it's a county authority. But it's that key local authority for children's social care and adult social care. It involves an integrated care board, so everything to do with health. We now talk about integrated care boards, where once it was clinical commissioning groups. Some of you remember that. And it involves the police force as well. So having the chief constable for the area very much involved as a key local strategic partner. So police, health, and the local authority delivering on children's services and adult services as well. They are responsible for working together to safeguard and promote the welfare of children, including identifying and responding to needs. They do have to think about including the rest of us as well. And we'll come on to take a look at what that will look like. And I think some things for you to think about in that too. So in terms of the status of the guidance, it applies, you can see I've highlighted very deliberately, it applies in entirety to all education providers and childcare settings. Really important to note that. And it does require us to comply with the guidance unless there are exceptional circumstances. Now, what those exceptional circumstances would be, I really don't know, because it would be exceptional. I don't know, perhaps some of the timelines which are indicated, heaven forbid, if something catastrophic happened in one of your settings, and you just could not meet certain timelines and expectations because you were dealing with fire, flood, whatever else it might be. Those are the only kind of exceptional circumstances I can think of as we consider this. But just to note that, so it's always to comply with it unless in absolutely exceptional circumstances. So it's very much informed by Section 11 of the Children Act of 2004. And those of you who've been around in education, or indeed if you were in health before, will remember that this was all part of the Every Child Matters agenda. And it places a duty on a range of organisations, agencies and individuals to ensure that their functions and any services that we contract out as well are discharged having regard to the need to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. Quite simply, we have to keep that in mind all the time. Now, so who does this actually apply to? The ones I've already referenced, I've highlighted at the bottom. So you've got local authorities and all of the suite of services that they provide, NHS organisations and the police, including police and crime commissioners. But also, I'm thinking more explicitly, and it is explicit in the guidance, the British Transport Police, for example, which it might be easy to think would be sat within the police, but it's got its own domain. The probation service, and there's more stuff in here about us working more closely with probation and with the youth offending service, as well as directors of secure training centres and other offender institutions. So those are all of the areas which are covered to make sure that we have due regard for promoting and supporting the well-being of children and young people. So the basis of the guidance then is that it recognises, whilst parents and carers have the primary caring responsibility for their children, inextricably, local authorities must work with partner agencies and organisations because they have specific duties to safeguard and promote the welfare of the children in their area. And it's very much informed by the Children Act 2004, point 2, about placing a duty on the local authority to promote and cooperate with partners and other agencies to improve the well-being of children in their area, giving due regard to children's need for help in safeguarding. Here we are in terms of our statutory duty then. Safeguarding partners are under a duty to make arrangements to work together with other partners locally, including us as education providers and childcare settings, to safeguard and promote the welfare and children in their area. So that is the whole explicit basis on which we're working. Many of you will be familiar with how safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children is defined, or was defined, in the previous version of Working Together to Safeguard Children. But I think it's really important that we understand the refined basis of what's been issued, so that we kind of know, if you like, the rules of what we're working with. So it's about providing help and support to meet the needs of children as soon as problems emerge. And this is where we'll come on to look at early help. And there's a much greater emphasis on early help in the guidance as well. Statutory guidance for the integrated care boards on the executive lead roles that they need to have, and make sure they follow. Protecting children from maltreatment, whether it's within or outside the home, including online. Now, that is explicit, and that's really important. And preventing the impairment of children's mental and physical health or development. And it goes on. Ensuring that children grow up in circumstances consistent with the provision of safe and effective care. So all of this applies to everything that we're doing in the education settings, and promoting the upbringing of children with the birth parents or otherwise their wider family network. And again, this wider family network is rather more stressed in this particular version, through kinship care arrangements potentially, and whenever possible, involving wider family groups if that can be beneficial to safeguarding the children. It's all about what is in the best interest of the children, and taking action to enable all children to have the best outcomes in line with the Children's Social Care National Framework, which is worth a look if you've got time. So this is the nub of it. This is where the key updates are in terms of multi-agency expectations for all practitioners, laid out in considerable detail amongst those 168 pages. But where we're going to be particularly looking at is working with parents and families, and it's explicit in the guidance about what is expected and how we do that. And it is ambitious. It's important, but it's ambitious. And I know many of you will be seeking to work in this kind of way with parents and families already, but it does place a considerable onus, I would argue, on education providers in terms of how it's described, which we'll look at. And the roles and responsibilities of safeguarding partners, the role of education and childcare providers, multi-agency practice standards. And I think that's important. If you have a hankering for wanting to know at any point in time, whether it's now or in future when you're handling certain things, what those multi-agency practice standard expectations are, they are laid out in detail in chapter 3 and into chapter 4 of what's expected of us as well. So you can see them with flowcharts, timelines, what happens if this, therefore this, and so on. And key updates around support for disabled children and tackling harm outside the home. So firstly, chapter 1 puts and I'm going to do it chapter by chapter, so you've got the salient points for each of those chapter headings. Chapter 1 is about shared responsibility. It really highlights how positive outcomes for children depend on us and others working together effectively in a multi-agency way. Key additions then. So expectations as to how we work with others, how all practitioners work together in safeguarding and child protection to share the same goals, learn with and from each other, have what they need to help families, acknowledge and appreciate difference, and challenge each other. I think it's worth pausing on this because this is quite significant. It might seem obvious that we should all have the same goals, but sometimes I know it doesn't feel like that when you're in the midst of dealing with some of the very complex cases that many of you have. There can sometimes feel like you're having to fight to get the support that you believe is necessary, and therefore remembering that we're working in partnership with others can sometimes be strained. I'm not saying always. We come across, Emma and I in the Essential Safeguarding Company, of some amazing examples of partnership working, but I know where to take point three, they need to have what they need to help families, where capacity is very difficult and where it's constrained, and typically local authorities might like to have more resources to be able to do more. This can be tricky, so we need to remember we have the same goals, and to be clear on what they are. Actually, if we're to share them, we need clarity around that, and a real conversation and way of agreeing what those goals are for the child and potentially for their family, and learning with and from each other. This is an essential point, I think, making sure that we do this and we seek to do this, so that it's not necessarily pointing the finger, but it's trying to really listen with a view to understanding and working together. But we all know that's much easier when people have the resources they need to help families. And this is going to be a critical piece, I believe, to the success of this update. And acknowledging and appreciating difference. We can't have differences. We will inevitably have differences of opinions sometimes. But it's really looking to have that kind of professional, supportive challenge, remembering always of what's in the best interests of the children and young people. So I think, although that seems very, very simple, 5 key points there around the ethos of how we work together. But I think that is absolutely central in very many ways. And when we come to the end, I should have said earlier, there will be a chance for comments and questions, and I will be picking up certain points with the DFE, as queries emerge, be it today or into the future, and also looking to get some guidance from the local strategic partners on some of this stuff as well. And I think, given that it's very clear in here that people need to have what they need to help families, and we have a strong basis on which to be campaigning to make sure that children's care services certainly have what they need. And how about them working with parents and carers? We know that they are critical partners in supporting the safeguarding of our children and indeed the educational advancement of them. Now, the 4 principles that we are expected to follow when working with parents and carers are effective partnership and the importance of building strong, positive, trusting, and cooperative relationships. I see many examples week in, week out of how you seek to do that, and others across the education sector. It can be challenging, we know. Having respectful, non-blaming, clear, and inclusive verbal and non-verbal communication that is adapted to the needs of parents and carers. So a real accessibility issue there, and also about making parents feel, I suppose, that we're on the side of their children, and it isn't about pointing the finger. Sometimes they might think we are, no matter what best efforts we have to try and make them not feel the case, but this is one of the guiding principles of this guidance. Point 3, empowering parents and carers to participate in decision making by equipping them with the information they need, keeping them updated, and directing them to further resources. And on this point, there's a whole list of incredibly useful resources at the end of working together to safeguard children, as indeed in keeping children safe in education. So, if sometimes you're kind of needing a quick route in to things that help you, some absolutely brilliant stuff there, which you could be looking to direct parents and carers to, as well as other resources that you might have available from your local authority. And very much involving parents and carers in the design of the processes and services that affect them. We get used to working with this world of safeguarding and working with local authorities and the organisations to whom they delegate certain parts of safeguarding and support for children and families. But it can feel like a totally alien world to parents and carers. So it's remembering that we pause to explain that to them as well, so that they really can be fully involved in stuff that's going on with their children where appropriate, because we know sometimes the fundamental issue might very well be the parent or carer, in which case, of course, you've got to use your discretion around that. In chapter 2, there are some key updates on multi-agency safeguarding arrangements where I think there is an opportunity for us in education. Let's take a look at this then. So it describes multi-agency working in 3 levels of structure, where we've got, remembering those central partners, integrated care boards linked to health, the police and local authorities. 3 levels of structure where we are expected to be following this guidance. Strategic leaders, so chief executives, might be chief execs and multi-academy trusts. Many of you I know are leaders as head teachers in your schools. And then senior and middle managers as well. So heads of services, team leaders, team managers, head teachers, direct practice, such as frontline social workers, police constables and teachers. So it applies to all of us. And then the arrangements that need to be in place. So we've got those 3 statutory partner agencies. They are a lead safeguarding partner if they're the local authority, the police or the health service. And they can then appoint a delegated safeguarding partner to deliver on operations. I think whilst we don't need to get hung up on this language, we do need to be familiar with it, because you could very well be being invited to meetings by your local authority in particular, I would imagine, where there's reference to a delegated safeguarding partner, and it's come from the local safeguarding partner. And you might be thinking, how does this all work? So you've got your local safeguarding partners, those 3 key elements, and then delegated safeguarding partners. Now, this is where we need to be thinking about joint responsibility of the local safeguarding partners. They are meant to be working as a team, as opposed to being just a voice for their own organisations. They're accountable within their organisation for how they lead strategically on safeguarding and how effectively it's being put in place operationally, but they have to be making sure that they work together as a team. Now, when it comes to the delegated safeguarding partner status, this is where you'll have children's services effectively who are a delegated safeguarding partner on behalf of the chief exec of the local authority delivering on that. You'll have your local police force and perhaps PCSOs delivering on behalf of the chief constable for the area. So it's delegated to them operationally. The chair of the new local safeguarding partnership can be rotated through these delegated safeguarding partners. And I think this is where there is potentially an opportunity in education, because some educational agencies, organisations might very well be considered to be a delegated safeguarding partner in some circumstances. Some of you might know people, or even yourselves could have been an independent chair of a safeguarding panel previously. There won't now be a specific role for a partnership chair. It will rotate between the delegated safeguarding partners if they wish it to be rotated. And therefore, there isn't necessarily independent scrutiny. But it is recommended that local strategic partners have a rep from the education sector present at strategic discussions. I think this is so important. I've lost count of the number of times I've made recommendations in the past 12 months alone to the people that we work with to seek to have a seat at the table strategically with the local authorities that they work with on those safeguarding partnership boards. I think it's absolutely critical, especially since in the Working Together to Safeguard Children guidance, it explicitly states that we have a unique perspective on things and a unique role because of the protracted, in-depth involvement with children and young people from an educational perspective. And so our voice, the voice of the education sector, to my mind, is absolutely vital. So I would strongly encourage you to be asking questions around: how could we get involved? How can we have a seat at the table? How do we make sure we're involved in those strategic discussions? And if you are invited to any particular meetings, go if you possibly can. If you yourself can't, get a member of your safeguarding team whom you trust, to represent you and the organisation in that capacity to go, because it is so important to be present and to be highlighting what this guidance means for you and your colleagues in your setting in practice. So I think it's absolutely critical. Real opportunity here. And local strategic partnerships are now being strongly consider inviting people along from the voluntary sector, charities, social enterprises, childcare settings, which is so important and often overlooked, and sports clubs as well, to consider what kind of arrangements are made. This is an explicit new addition, and I think it's a really, really important one as well. So, and for those of you, I know some of you will have nursery settings that you look after, so you might very well consider getting involved from that perspective too. It's really, really important to broaden it out. Chapter 3 has us looking at providing help, support, and protection. So what have we got in here then that's new? Early help is highlighted as being so important, and I think my experience in working with many of you and others across schools and colleges sector is that more and more local authorities are asking about the early help that we've put in place to begin with if we're making a safeguarding referral. So this section is so important. Sometimes it's gone beyond that and it needs to go through to safeguarding referral, child protection, but there's a real enhanced focus on this, and it's encouraging us to share information, identify and understand risks of harm, and ensure that children and families receive timely support, and preferably early support where possible as well. We're encouraged to consider the needs of the family in all of this. I already know many of you do, but assessments for early help should consider how the needs of the family members impact one another. So, for example, do parents have mental health issues, disability issues? Are they experiencing housing issues, substance misuse, alcohol misuse, crime affecting them and their family, which could very well nudge it into getting more support from a wider multi-agency field of people? And specific needs should be considered around disabilities where English isn't the first language, fathers or male carers who sometimes, we very often are quick to ask, where's mum in all of this? But how about thinking about the male carers and dads too? And parents who identify as LGBTQ+, because that could have real impacts for their children. And early help services can focus on improving family functioning. Some of you have already been involved in this, I know, and but getting those hard to reach families involved is part of the challenge that we have around this. But we have to keep trying. Sorry, I've skipped ahead. Too many points that may come back. Yeah, there we go. So on the family needs, next up. Safeguarding promoting the welfare of children. So children's social care assessments should consider the parenting capacity of both resident or non-resident parents and carers, as well as any other adult who's living in the household who can help to respond to child's needs. And this is a new emphasis, should really consider the wider family network as well. And we know that grandparents, aunts, uncles, even sometimes very close family friends can be a critical part of the support for a family at difficult times. So considering how could they be involved in a family network meeting as well. I think there's a nod to education in this change here around lead practitioners. A lead practitioner will be allocated by the local authority and their partners. So that could very well be us in education. And a lead practitioner role can be held now by a whole range of people, including social workers. So it's not inconceivable that if you're a head teacher, a DSL, it might be decided as a group, but it has to be decided all together that you might be the appropriate lead practitioner at a certain point in time for safeguarding promoting the welfare of a particular child. If it's child protection, it's very clear that the lead practitioner should always be a social worker. But it is an interesting point, this, about lead practitioners could be allocated from within a whole range of partners. And I think it's both an opportunity, but we also just need to be really careful that things which are particularly tricky or complex are not always coming back to education, because you have so much on your plate. So it's both an opportunity there where it would be appropriate to be the lead, one to just watch out on too. It is important that the lead practitioner has the appropriate skills, knowledge, and capacity being key to carry out the assessments and undertaking that direct work with families and coordinating services. Then it goes on to talk about support for disabled children and their carers. So the assessments for disabled children should focus on specific needs of the family and the child, looking at strengths that they have and gathering effective information to support best outcomes for all. Um, and I think this is an important point around local authorities should implement a designated social care officer to improve the links between social care services and the special educational needs and disability system. We those of us who are used to working with SEND children can sometimes see how that can fall through the gaps. So that's an important change there. Hopefully it will have real impact. And then harm outside the home. This is now really explicit that we need to consider the needs and experiences, especially of vulnerabilities of individuals or groups, and what they're experiencing outside of the home. It could involve online abuse, serious violence, sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, a whole range of things to be mindful of, and working with partner agencies around that as well. So yeah, that's an important additional piece. And then in terms of child protection, and I encourage you to take a look at this, there have been updates in the guidance to the standards that are required for multi-agency partners around child protection. It's very, very clear on timelines and flow of who should be doing what. So take a look at chapter 4. That's a really, chapters 3 and 4 on this are really particularly important. And so it says, for example, that when a referral is made, it should be acknowledged by the local authority, the delegated partner being Children's Care Services, within 1 working day. They then have up to 45 days to investigate and take action, and there have to be an extraordinary reason as to why something hadn't been decided in that time frame, and they'd have to report back on why. And I think that's a really important piece. And then organisational responsibilities. One of the things I particularly welcome, having sought to work on many past occasions when I worked in a college environment as a DSL, working with probation and youth offending service, is that there is now a greater emphasis on sharing of information between schools, colleges, local safeguarding partners, and those who are working in probation and youth offending, and also the prison service as well, using the MAPA arrangements, that's the multi-agency public protection arrangements, to make sure that there is greater emphasis on information sharing and partnership working. Because a MAPA, you can see here, the whole purpose of a MAPA is to help to reduce reoffending behaviour of sexual and violent offenders in order to protect the public, including previous victims, from serious harm. And if we're not having that exchange of information between the services who are supporting offenders with serious track records and their children and families, schools, colleges, then we've got a real problem on our hands. And I know in certain settings have had a real problem on our hands previously. So this piece, I think, is to be welcomed. And then there is an added link of support for those who are care leavers and those who are care experienced as well. So it says, although it isn't a statutory requirement, local authorities should notify the Secretary of State for Education and Ofsted of the death of a care leaver up to and including the age of 24. And then if it's deemed appropriate by local partners, that there could be learning to be gained from looking into death and what happened, how it potentially could have been avoided, they may conduct a local safeguarding practice review. So greater and determined support there to learn from what can happen to care leavers, because we know they're a particularly vulnerable cohort. And then in terms of child death reviews, very, very little substantive update, just making sure that some of the factual updates have been made to reflect the latest legislation and guidance around domestic abuse, the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, and the National Framework Strategy Guidance, plus integrated care boards being now referenced instead of clinical commissioning groups. And so that, in the space of just shy of 40 minutes, brings us to the conclusion of the key updates. And I'm keen to kind of know how this has landed with you, really. First thoughts and any comments or questions that you might have, particularly as I think about feeding back to the DFE and others on this. I'm going to stop sharing and take a look at whether we have any particular comments or questions at this stage. Any surprises in there for any of you, or anything that you particularly welcome or think, Faye?
Morning, Trudie. Thank you. That was really, really helpful. One of the things I'm keen to know more about from our LA partners is how you get a seat at the table and be a part of those strategic discussions, because I think that's a real opportunity, and how we might go about that. We serve 3 local authorities and they work all in different ways. So I think having that in the guidance laid out, that there's that expectation, and not only with education, but also the voluntary sector and how they might involve partners there.
I think it's a real opportunity, and I think you know, to my mind, it wouldn't hurt a kind of an enthusiastic New Year email to the local authority, to the chief exec, to go, oh, you know, on the back of working together to safeguarding children coming out, you know, we're so keen to get involved and to work with you. Because it's landed then, it's there, you know, and they have to decide whether they're willing to take that up or not. But it is so, so important. And I think it would genuinely aid partnership working and understanding both ways as well. So yeah, I'd really encourage getting that message sent, and seeing and asking the question, you, what does happen next? How do we do it? So yeah, thank you, Faye.
Great.
Thank you. Paula.
Hello.
Hey, hello.
Hi, Trudie. Now I don't know whether I've dreamt this because I am a little sleep deprived, but I have visions that I had a conversation with with children's social care, because they'd had a police report sent to them about a family, and wanted my opinion on how the child was displaying at school. And I said, well, I've not received that police report. And she said something along the lines of, you'll only receive a police report now if it's domestic abuse, or if I can't remember what she said, but she said we're not getting as many as we used to. Now, how does that stack up in this working together document?
A very good point. And actually, I think the why needs to be asked there. Why is that, actually? Because there is a real emphasis on those local safeguarding lead partners to be sharing in the proactive interest of safeguarding. So if it's domestic abuse only, but you know that there are other things, then actually there is a question to be asked. And it goes also back to Faye's point about having a seat at the table, because where you have that, this is
the conversation like Joe and I were just having, you know, if a police raid happened for drugs on one of our children's houses and the parent doesn't disclose that to us and the child doesn't disclose that to us, how do we actually know? And how do we support that child?
Yep, absolutely. And you don't. And it's I would argue, and I would argue it with the, you know, the local chief constable, that actually working together safeguarding children puts an emphasis on making sure that there is proactive sharing of information in the interest of safeguarding children, and domestic abuse alone is not sufficient. There have to be the other pieces of information which are shared for exactly the reason that you've given. So I think there's that pushback to be had. But again, you can't, I suppose part of the issue is us, and I know I've had this many times myself, saying to people after the event, well, why didn't I know? But if you've got a seat at the table to begin with, you can be saying, we have to have this, and it might be a whole extra layer of admin and work for people. But if we are to take the spirit of working together to safeguard children, and apply it, we have to have that information.
I wonder if that's a message that can come from the trust to the police as a whole, rather than just individual schools, because I think our voices get lost.
Yeah, maybe so. And maybe Faye, you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Paula. And I'm just looking at the key additions you shared, Trudie, around actually this statutory guidance is going to give us more leverage around having what we need to help families and being able to challenge each other. And I know police reports are a classic example of that. Some are timely and relevant and come through at the right time. Others, they never come through. Or you find out through a social worker and not through the right channel. So yeah, two things. I think that email to get a seat at the table so that we can share and raise some of these concerns, but also use this guidance, quote from it, when we're having those courageous conversations about why this information is so important, is yeah, two avenues we can certainly explore. I think so, this is, for me, reading some of this, is the most significant changes that will put that statutory duty back to those 3 LA partners, and we can use it in our dialogue with them.
Yeah, I agree. It feels a little bit to me, I have to say, like a bit. Some of you, do you remember the Children's Trust Board model that was in place? I don't know, about 10 years ago. It feels a little bit like that, which I personally was a fan of, because education had to have a seat at the table, and to my mind, it would be very strange for a local safeguarding partnership to deny that. Why would you, when it says in the very guidance about the unique role that education has, because of its pivotal place in the lives of children and young people? Why would you deny that place? Good. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Well, hopefully that's been useful for you. It's been great to see you today. And if there are any queries that you've got that follow on, feel free to share them, because actually chances are if one of you's got a query, others of you might have the same one, and we could have different routes that we can field those queries to within the police, DFE, and also social care. So please do ask away as we follow on from this, and I will look to send you the recording as well, so that you've got that if there's anything that you want to pick up on, or anything you want to share with colleagues. So thank you all so very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye.